"Bring him forward," the Emperor commanded, his voice deep and resonant, reverberating through the chamber. A pair of guards clad in ornate battle armor escorted Karl Ellen into the room. The human diplomat's footsteps echoed on the polished obsidian floor as he approached, his face impassive, yet his eyes sharp with awareness. His modest gray suit was a stark contrast to the ostentatious attire of the Darkanis, a fact that seemed to amuse some of the council members, who smirked as he passed. Karl stopped at the foot of the Emperor's throne and inclined his head slightly, not quite a bow, but enough to show he was not entirely reckless. "Karl Ellen," Emperor Kale said, drawing out the name as though testing its weight. "You are here on behalf of humanity, to plead for peace. Are you not?" Karl's jaw tightened at the word plead, but he held his composure. "I am here to warn you, your majesty. Humanity seeks no quarrel. But should you provoke us, the consequences will be catastrophic. For your empire." A ripple of laughter broke out among the council. Commander Lorian Valther, seated to the Emperor's right, leaned forward, his crimson cape spilling over his armored shoulders. His voice was laced with derision. "Is that so? And what do your kind believe they can achieve against the might of Darkanis? You are but an anthill challenging a firestorm." Karl turned his gaze to Lorian, his expression unyielding. "An anthill survives because it is underestimated. A firestorm burns out when it has nothing left to consume." The laughter died as quickly as it had begun. A palpable unease spread through the chamber, though it was quickly masked by scornful sneers. The Emperor gestured for Karl to continue, his expression unreadable. "Your Majesty, I stand before you not to provoke, but to enlighten," Karl said, his voice steady and deliberate. "Humanity's history is one of survival, and survival has made us dangerous. For millennia, we have waged war not just for power, but for existence itself. From the brutal conquest of the 16th century to the industrialized slaughter of the 20th, we learned to adapt, to innovate, and to endure. Every empire that sought to dominate us crumbled to dust. Yours will fare no differently." The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of energy coursing through the walls. The Emperor's lips curved into a thin smile, though his eyes betrayed no amusement. "You speak boldly, human, perhaps too boldly." Karl took a step closer, ignoring the guards who bristled at his movement. "Boldness is all that stands between survival and annihilation. Your empire may be vast, your technology superior, but you misunderstand the essence of humanity. We are not bound by tradition or weakened by arrogance. We evolve, and when we are cornered, we strike with a ferocity that no enemy has ever survived." Lorian rose from his seat, his voice booming. "Enough of this drivel. You come here to spew threats and ancient tales, yet your kind cowers on its fragile little planet, clinging to its delusions of strength. If war is what you fear, then war is what you shall have." Karl's eyes locked with Lorian's unflinching. "It is not fear that brings me here, Commander. It is pity." A murmur spread through the council at the audacity of the statement. The Emperor raised a hand to silence them, his gaze fixed on Karl. "You believe you can intimidate us with stories of your past, but you fail to understand the inevitability of Darkanis. We are not like the petty empires of your world. We are eternal, and we do not bow to warnings." "Then you are already defeated," Karl said quietly. He turned to address the entire council. "You see humanity as divided, fractured, weak. But in war, we unite. And when we unite, we become unstoppable. You will declare war, and it will mark the end of your empire, not ours." The Emperor leaned back in his throne, his expression unchanged. "You have delivered your message, human. You may leave. Your warning will be remembered, though your species will not." Karl bowed slightly, the faintest glimmer of a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "The end of Darkanis will not come from my words, your Majesty. It will come from your hubris." As the guards escorted him out, the council erupted into debate. Some argued for immediate war, others for caution, though none dared suggest peace. Commander Lorian stood and faced the Emperor, his voice resolute. "We cannot allow this insult to go unanswered. Humanity must be crushed before their delusions spread further." The Emperor nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Prepare the fleet. We will strike first and remind the galaxy why the Darkani's empire is feared above all, far above the obsidian halls." The massive fleet of Darkani's ships began to mobilize, their crimson lights piercing the darkness of space. On the bridge of the flagship Nemesis, Lorien stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching as the war machine of Darkani's roared to life. Meanwhile, on Earth, Carl Ellen stepped into a conference room filled with humanity's top military leaders. A grim expression settled on his face as he addressed them. They didn't listen. Admiral Brad Cross, a tall man with piercing blue eyes, leaned forward. "Then we move to Plan B." Carl nodded. "They'll strike first, but they won't expect what's waiting for them." Cross's voice was a low growl as he stood. "They wanted war. Let's show them why humanity always survives." Admiral Brad Cross broke the silence, his voice sharp and commanding. "You warned them, Carl. Now it's time we prepare for what's coming." "They think we're fragmented," Carl replied, "that we're unorganized, reckless. But they don't understand what history has forged in us. They're walking into a war they cannot win." General Chris Ward leaned forward, his hands clasped together. His weathered face carried the marks of countless battles, yet his sharp green eyes gleamed with determination. "Then let's remind them who they're dealing with. Let's remind them what humanity is capable of when it's pushed to the brink." Carl glanced at Dr. Andrew Brady, the youngest among them, but no less vital. A historian and scientist, Andrew had spent his career studying the patterns of war, what caused them, how they were fought, and how they ended. He had been the one to compile the war history Carl had recited to the Darkani's council. Now, he adjusted his glasses and activated the holographic display. The image of Earth appeared, slowly rotating as red markers highlighted regions and timelines. Andrew spoke, his tone calm but weighted. "Our history is one of conflict, yes, but more importantly, it's one of survival. The Darkanis think we're primitive because we fought each other for centuries. What they don't understand is that every war taught us something new, something that makes us dangerous now." The hologram shifted to an image of a 16th century battlefield. Armored soldiers clashed, cannons fired, and smoke blanketed the scene. The wars of the 1500s were brutal. Andrew began. Empires like the Ottoman and Spanish sought dominance, driven by resources and belief systems. Humanity learned then that power alone was not enough to win. Strategy was born on these fields. Coordinated movements, supply lines, and alliances became essential. Empires rose and fell, Carl added, his voice steady. The lesson? Nothing is permanent. Even the mightiest can fall when they overreach. The image shifted again, this time to the 18th century. Lines of redcoats fired muskets in perfect formation, their opponents responding in kind. The 1700s and 1800s, Andrew continued, saw the Industrial Revolution take hold. War evolved with it. Weapons became deadlier, logistics more complex. Napoleon's conquest taught us the value of mobility and leadership. His empire was vast, but it crumbled under the weight of its own ambition. General Ward grunted. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The Darkanis think their size makes them invincible. They're wrong. The hologram accelerated through time, now showing the trenches of World War I, soldiers huddled in mud, explosions tearing the earth apart around them. Andrew's voice grew somber. World War I was a lesson in endurance. Technology had outpaced strategy, and millions died in the stalemate. But even in the face of overwhelming loss, humanity found a way to adapt. Tanks, planes, and radio communications changed everything. And then came the Second World War. Admiral Cross said, his tone dark. The hologram displayed the iconic image of a mushroom cloud rising over Hiroshima, a conflict that reshaped the world and birthed weapons capable of annihilating civilizations. Nuclear power was the ultimate equalizer, and the Cold War that followed taught us the art of deterrence. Victory wasn't just about winning battles anymore. It was about ensuring the enemy didn't dare start one in the first place. Carl nodded. The Dark Khani's think our violence is a weakness. But every war strengthened us. We don't just fight to survive. We fight to learn, to innovate, to endure. Andrew advanced the hologram to modern times. Images of advanced drones, cyber warfare, and orbital weapons filled the air. By the 21st century, humanity had turned warfare into an art form. Technology became the deciding factor. Artificial intelligence, precision strikes, and psychological warfare redefined how battles were fought. We stopped fighting over land and started fighting over information and resources. General Ward leaned back in his chair, his voice gruff but resolute. And every time we fought, we got smarter, more efficient. The Dark Khani's are coming at us with overwhelming force, thinking they can crush us in one blow. But they have no idea what they're up against. They've never fought an enemy like us. Admiral Cross folded his arms, his piercing blue eyes fixed on the hologram. They've been at peace for centuries, Carl. Their empire hasn't faced a real threat in generations. They're arrogant, complacent. That's their greatest weakness. And our greatest strength, Carl replied. We've never had the luxury of complacency. Humanity has always lived with the possibility of destruction. We don't fear it. We prepare for it. Andrew deactivated the hologram, plunging the room into a heavy silence. The weight of history hung in the air, a reminder of what humanity had endured to reach this point. Carl stepped forward, addressing them all. We've survived tyrants, invaders, and catastrophes of our own making. Every empire that thought it could crush us learned the same lesson. Humanity doesn't break. We bend, we adapt, and then we fight back harder than anyone thought possible. Admiral Cross stood, his presence commanding. The Dark Khani's think they're declaring war on a divided species. What they're really doing is uniting us in a way they can't comprehend. This is no longer about survival. It's about showing them what happens when you push humanity too far. The tension in the room transformed into resolve. The men around the table exchanged glances, their expressions hardening. This was not just a war for Earth. It was a reckoning, a declaration to the galaxy that humanity was no one's prey. Carl felt a spark of hope in the midst of the storm. The Dark Khani's believed they were invincible, but they had made a fatal error. They had underestimated the very species that had perfected the art of survival. As the war room prepared for the next stage of planning, Carl glanced at Andrew and General Ward. They won't stop until they think we're broken, he said quietly. General Ward smirked, his voice filled with steel. Then we'll make sure they never get the chance. Admiral Cross stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. It's time to remind the galaxy why humanity always comes out on top. Let's show them what we've learned. The cold void of space was silent, but aboard the Erebus, Admiral Brad Cross felt the weight of the impending storm. The flagship of humanity's fleet, a sleek marvel of engineering, hummed with quiet energy as its systems prepared for war. Cross stood at the command deck, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the vastness of the stars through the reinforced glass. Beyond the sensor range, the Dark Khani's fleet advanced, an unrelenting wave of crimson ships, their glowing hulls cutting through the darkness like blades. Admiral, the fleet is in position, Lieutenant Aaron Blake reported, his voice steady but tinged with tension. The young officer's eyes flicked between his console and the towering figure across, who remained motionless, his blue eyes fixed on the abyss. Cross finally turned, his voice calm and authoritative. Hold position. Let them come to us. Their arrogance will be their undoing. Blake nodded, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed his nerves. Aye, sir. Fleet-wide orders confirmed. Across the human armada, warships adjusted their formation, aligning themselves in a calculated defensive grid near Jupiter. The planet loomed behind them, its swirling storms a silent witness to the battle about to unfold. Each ship bristled with advanced weaponry, plasma railguns, AI-guided missile pods, and kinetic shields capable of absorbing even the most devastating energy blasts. On board the Nemesis, the Darkani's flagship, Commander Lorian Valter surveyed the approaching battlefield with a mixture of anticipation and unease. The bridge was a sea of activity, with officers shouting commands and data streaming across holographic displays. Lorian's crimson armor gleamed under the pulsing light, but his face was shadowed by doubt. "Commander," a tactical officer reported, "the humans have positioned their fleet near the gas giant. Minimal movement detected. They appear to be holding." Lorian frowned, his sharp features tightening. Holding or waiting? Emperor Kale Dractor's voice cut through the air, cold and commanding. The Emperor had joined the bridge, his presence a towering shadow that seemed to chill the room. "It makes no difference. They are but vermin, clinging to hope. Crush them swiftly, Lorian. Show them the might of Darkanis." Lorian bowed his head, but hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Yes, Your Majesty." As the Darkani's fleet surged forward, their formation tightened into a spearhead designed to pierce the heart of the human defense line. The first wave of fighters broke off, streaking ahead with lethal precision, their energy cannons charging for the initial strike. On the Erebus, alarms blared as sensor arrays lit up with activity. "Incoming fighters, Admiral," Blake called out. Cross's voice was steady, cutting through the rising tension. "Engage defensive protocols. Deploy drones and activate the railguns. Hold fire on the main cannons until my command." The human fleet came to life. Automated drones, each the size of a small fighter, swarmed out of their bays, forming a shimmering wall of moving metal. Railguns fired with deafening velocity, their projectiles slicing through the advancing fighters with ruthless efficiency. Explosions lit the darkness. Brief flashes of light as ships and drones alike were torn apart in the chaos. General Chris Ward watched the battle unfold from the ground base on Earth, his feed streaming live data from the fleet. "Damn it, Brad," he muttered under his breath. "Don't let them get too close." The Erebus shuddered as the first wave of Darkani's fighters reached the fleet. Explosions rippled across the shields, causing the deck to vibrate. Blake braced himself against his console, shields holding at 78%. "Redirect power from secondary systems to reinforce them," Cross ordered, his voice unshaken. He stepped closer to the tactical display, his sharp eyes scanning the enemy formation. "They're probing us," he murmured, "testing our defenses before the main strike. Then we give them something to remember," said Captain Darius Holt, the Erebus's chief weapons officer, a broad-shouldered man with a reputation for ruthlessness. Holt's hands hovered over the control panel. "Just give the word, sir." Cross nodded. "Fire the pulse cannons. Target their vanguard." The Erebus's hull glowed as its pulse cannons charged, releasing bursts of concentrated plasma energy that tore through the enemy's front line. Ships disintegrated in fiery explosions, their fragments scattering like shattered glass. On the Nemesis, Lorian's fists clenched as reports of losses poured in. He turned to the Emperor, his voice strained. "They're stronger than anticipated. Their technology is impressive." Kale's expression darkened. "Enough excuses, Lorian. Deploy the second wave and unleash the disruptor cannon. I will not tolerate failure." The disruptor cannon, a massive weapon mounted on the Nemesis, began to charge, its energy signature spiking across the battlefield. The weapon's power had been rumored to obliterate entire fleets in a single strike. "Admiral, energy spike detected on the enemy flagship." Blake shouted, "It's the disruptor cannon." Cross's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "All ships, scatter formation. Deploy decoy flares and redirect power to maneuvering thrusters." The fleet moved with practiced precision, ships breaking formation to create a seemingly chaotic spread. Bright flares erupted across the battlefield, confusing the enemy targeting systems. The Nemesis fired. A beam of crimson energy sliced through space, vaporizing everything in its path. Several human ships were caught in the blast, reduced to nothing in an instant. The surviving ships, however, maneuvered around the devastation, closing the distance between themselves and the Darkani's fleet. Minimal impact, Blake reported, his voice betraying his relief. Cross allowed himself a grim smile. They overplayed their hand. All ships, focus fire on their midline, cut their fleet in two. The human fleet retaliated with ruthless efficiency. Plasma railguns, AI-guided missiles, and energy torpedoes rained down on the Darkani's fleet, overwhelming their defenses. Ships erupted in fiery bursts, their debris scattering into the void. On the Nemesis, Lorien watched in horror as the fleet's formation began to crumble. He turned to Kale, desperation in his voice. "We need to retreat and regroup. Their tactics are—" "Silence!" Kale roared, his eyes blazing with fury. "Darkanis does not retreat." Lorien hesitated, his loyalty clashing with his growing realization that the Emperor's arrogance was leading them to ruin. Before he could speak again, an alert sounded. "Commander," an officer reported, panic evident. "Human forces are targeting the Nemesis. Their flagship is leading the charge. On the Erebus." Cross's voice was cold and decisive. "Focus all fire on their flagship. Let's finish this." The Erebus surged forward, leading a coordinated assault on the Nemesis. The two flagships exchanged devastating volleys of firepower, their shields flaring and buckling under the strain. Explosions rippled across the Nemesis's hull as its defenses faltered. On board, Lorien made a decision. He turned to the Emperor, his voice firm. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, but this war is lost." Before Kale could react, Lorien issued a command to the bridge crew. "Activate emergency protocols. Surrender the fleet." Chaos erupted on the bridge as the Emperor roared in defiance, but it was too late. The Nemesis's systems transmitted the order, and across the battlefield, Darkani's ships powered down their weapons. On the Erebus, Blake turned to Cross, disbelief on his face. "Sir, they're surrendering." Cross stared at the tactical display, his expression unreadable. "Hold fire. Let's see if they mean it." As the battlefield fell silent, the human fleet remained on high alert, prepared for any trickery. Cross stepped back from the display, his voice low. "We've won the battle, but the war is far from over." The Nemesis drifted, a hulking shell of what it had once been. Its once glorious crimson hull was now scarred and burning, massive breaches lining its surface. Inside, the bridge was a war zone. Burning panels, sparks arcing from shattered consoles, and a growing sense of desperation hanging in the air. Lorien Valter stood at the center, his armor stained with the chaos of battle, his face grim as he surveyed the damage. He had led his people into the jaws of defeat, and now, with the weight of that failure bearing down on him, he was forced to make the hardest decision of his life. "Commander," a voice croaked from a nearby console, weak and trembling. "The Nemesis is— we're taking on water. Hull integrity is critical." Lorien's breath came in shallow gasps. His mind raced. Every protocol he'd been taught, every tactical maneuver he'd mastered, had led them to this point. The Darkani's empire, once untouchable, was now on the brink of annihilation. He looked over to the throne-like chair where Emperor Kale Drakthar once commanded, but now it was vacant, his presence gone. The Emperor had refused to leave, and with his defiance had sealed the fate of the fleet. Lorien's fist clenched. "Activate the escape pods. Get the remaining officers to safety. We may have lost the fleet, but we don't have to lose the Empire." But as his orders were carried out, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind him. Lorien turned, and there, standing amidst the wreckage of their once proud flagship, was Admiral Brad Cross, the man who had led humanity to victory. His uniform was singed, his face hard as stone, but his eyes burned with unrelenting determination. "You're not escaping, Lorien." Cross's voice was low, each word like a hammer, striking the fragile remnants of Lorien's resolve. Lorien's gaze faltered for just a moment, But then he stood tall. He had never bowed to anyone. Never would he start now. The war is over. We've lost. Cross stepped forward, the weight of his victory carrying him with an undeniable presence. You've lost. Not us. Lorian's eyes narrowed. You think this victory is yours? He gestured around the decimated bridge. What's left? What's left of the Darkani's empire? Nothing but ashes. Your people are weak, unfit to hold power. You'll never know what true strength is. Cross stood still, unwavering. You've underestimated humanity at every turn. You thought you were invincible. You thought you could crush us with a single strike. But you never understood our nature. We survive. We learn. And when we fight to win. The two men locked eyes, and for a brief moment, a silence fell between them, heavy with the realization that their destinies had collided in a way neither had expected. Lorian, the commander of a dying empire, and Cross, the leader of a species that refused to be defeated. Cross took a step closer. This isn't about strength, Lorian. It's about resilience. It's about the will to stand when everything else is against you. The Darkanis, like every empire before them, will fall. And when they do, it will be humanity's turn to shape the future. Lorian's voice cracked, but he didn't back down. You won't understand until it's too late. We didn't lose to you. We lost because we were too proud, too sure that our power could never be challenged. And now look at us. I've led us to ruin. Cross's expression softened, though the fire in his eyes never dimmed. Pride comes before a fall, Lorian, but it's what you do after the fall that matters. You can choose to rebuild, or you can choose to die with your pride. The choice is yours. The sound of alarms interrupted the moment, a harsh reminder of the ticking clock. The Nemesis is beyond repair, Commander, an officer shouted. We have no choice but to abandon ship. Lorian's gaze shifted to the escape pods, to the remaining officers who had already begun to evacuate. He could still hear the echoes of Kale's voice, railing against the humans, urging them to fight to the end. But Kale was gone now, consumed by his own arrogance. For a moment, Lorian hesitated. A part of him, the soldier who had lived through countless battles, who had once believed in the might of his empire, wanted to fight to the bitter end. But there was nothing left to fight for. Darkanis had been defeated, and with it, his loyalty to an empire that had lost its way. Cross watched him closely, understanding flashing in his eyes. It's over. You fought for something that didn't exist anymore. But there's still a chance to live, to learn from this. Lorian nodded slowly, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. I will surrender, for what it's worth. I regret what we've done. Cross's face softened, and for a fleeting moment, Lorian saw the weight of responsibility in the Admiral's eyes, the burden of leadership, of knowing how many lives had been lost. But there was also something else there, understanding. Then you have one last chance, Lorian, Cross said quietly. But make no mistake, humanity doesn't forget. You'll have to prove your worth. The two men exchanged one last glance, and then Lorian turned toward the escape pods. His fingers brushed the console, activating the emergency systems. The Nemesis was falling apart, but the chance for survival still existed. It was a chance to rebuild, to seek redemption for him and for the empire he had served. As Lorian made his way to the pod bay, he glanced back one final time at the wreckage of the ship. The flames of the destroyed fleet flickered in the distance, a haunting reminder of what had been and what could never be again. The escape pod doors slid shut behind him, and he was launched into the cold abyss of space, far from the wreckage of the Darkani's empire. Across the stars, Earth stood triumphant. The human fleet, bloodied but unbroken, had emerged from the storm victorious. The Darkanis, once a seemingly invincible empire, had been crushed under the weight of their own arrogance. The silence of space now carried with it a message for all who would listen. Humanity had not just survived, it had triumphed. And in that victory, the seeds of a new age were planted. one in which the lessons of the past would never be forgotten, and in which the fires of ambition would burn brighter than ever before. Admiral Cross stood on the deck of the Erebus, looking out at the remains of the Darkani's fleet. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The galaxy was vast, and humanity was just beginning to realize the true extent of its potential. "Bring us home," Cross said, his voice filled with resolve. "It's time for a new chapter." And as the human fleet turned toward Earth, Lorian Valter watched from his pod, knowing that the fall of Darkanis was just the beginning of something greater, a new era of struggle, of survival, and of endless possibilities. The galaxy would remember the day humanity fought back. And from the ashes of war, a new power had risen,